And so we end up with this monstrous image of a god,
Yeah.
and it affects how we think about ourselves. There's nothing wrong with genocide if God done it.
I had the same thing.
Can't prove my point.
I did a video called "Could the God of the Bible be Satan?"
They taught us how to be a civilization, and we were grateful for their input, and we celebrated them for a long time. I was finding that whenever I applied those questions to things that don't quite make sense to the stories you tell from the Bible, it was leading to a completely different storyline that turned out to be the summary form of the Sumerian stories of our ancestors' contact with sky people, or what today we would call aliens or ETs.
You know, when you look into the Nag Hammadi and you see information about the archons, and where they're saying that, for example, one of the archons resembled this reptilian type being, and then another archon kind of almost resembles a gray alien, from the description at least. They supposedly in some way they are able to absorb human energy, negative emotions.
Oh yes. I think that's the most important insight of the archon stories.
Yeah.
The reason it isn't in the mainstream canon is because it contains themes that didn't fit the mainstream. So that includes an abduction narrative, that includes an invasion narrative. It includes a detailed unpacking of Genesis 6, which is a hybridization narrative. And clearly there came a point in the development of Christianity where they thought, this is going to be inconvenient. It wasn't just that they taught us about how to do plumbing or how to build a bit tool. It was things like makeup, adornment, more interesting clothing. They taught us how to be a civilization, and we were grateful for their input, and we celebrated them for a long time. Well, I mean, people today know me as the Paleo Contact guy. That's what I write about. I think I've written about 15 books, but the 4 best-selling ones are the ones about paleo contact. That's the theory that in the deep past our ancestors had contact with other civilizations, with ET visitors. But why written into it often surprises people. This is from the world of Christian ministry. And I was for 33 years in church-based ministry. I was an archdeacon in the Anglican church, and I was a theological educator. I was training pastors. So this sounds quite different to ET contact and human origins, but it was the theological educator role that actually led me into the world of ET contact, because I was teaching pastors the principles of interpreting ancient texts. And so we do source analysis, form analysis, all the essential linguistic questions of what do the words mean. And I was finding that whenever I applied those questions to things that don't quite make sense to the stories you tell from the Bible, it was leading to a completely different storyline that turned out to be the summary form of the Sumerian stories of our ancestors' contact with sky people, or what today we would call aliens or ETs. And what I've found, I've been really surprised since publishing A Statement from People. I've been contacted by so many people who are in communities of faith. They're in churches, and either of them had close encounter experiences, and suddenly they realize they're not allowed to mention that. You have all sorts of other supernatural experiences in a church, but don't mention ETs. Or they've seen things in the Bible in the same way I have. So wait a minute, that's a close encounter. That's a UFO. That's contact. That's colonization. And then found in a Bible group with their pastor, you don't mention that again if you want to stay in this church. And they're totally isolated. And they could be off-sided from their entire family if they start talking about these things. So they reach out to me. And often I hear from people, they may have had a close encounter experience when they were 15 years old, and now they're 65, and they still haven't been able to process it. They've never had anyone they could talk to about it. They haven't discovered all the communities on YouTube full of experiences, but they've seen me and they thought, I want to tell that guy. And so a lot of the time I'm hearing experiences that are decades old, but people haven't felt the freedom to share. It's a taboo subject, but our churches are at least half full of contactees and experiences who just haven't been able to come out the closet.
That's so true, because it's such a taboo. You can be excommunicated, you can be ostracized. right? So it's a tough thing to talk about, especially, in the Black and brown communities. It's almost like you dare not even bring anything up about a UFO or an alien. At least when I was growing up, in the 70s and 80s, it was like a topic that was really taboo, and hard to talk about. So people go for decades, literally, with this information and this thing on their consciousness, but they can't seem to find any way to get it out, to at least just express it to somebody that would listen without judging them.
Exactly. And that can go for generations. I mean, I often hear from people, guys will talk to me who might be in their 30s. They'll say, I've had this experience. They'll describe a close encounter, an abduction experience even, and they'll want help processing it. And I'll say, are you the first person in your family to have had this experience? Have your parents had anything like this happen to them? And they'll say, I don't think so. I feel like mother and dad would have mentioned something like that. And then a week later, they'll call me back and say, I mentioned it to my dad, and he said, well, son, since you said that, let's take what happened to me when I was 15. And they've kept this story. They haven't shared it because they wanted to protect their kids.
Yeah.
They didn't want their kids to think they were crazy.
Of course.
They didn't want anything disturbing to happen to them, so just steer them away from the whole topic. But it's actually impoverished the family because there was information there. They could have prepared their kids for these experiences. The kid could have had a less isolated, happier life if they'd known, actually, this happened to dad. He's okay. We'll all survive this. And sort of breaking that taboo within a family can be really hard. But the other thing, I'm really excited about my latest book, The Eden Conspiracy, because it shows that in the Bible, the narrative originally of the Hebrew Scriptures was one of paleo-contact. It's one that talked about the Tseber Hashemayim arriving. And that's the Hebrew for the sky armies.
That's right.
Turning up. It talks about invasion. It talks about the parceling up of the lands. El Elyon gives all the lands to the Elohim. It's a moment of colonization.
And Elohim is plural.
Elohim is plural, the powerful one. And when you read it that way, the stories make sense. Suddenly it makes sense why the Yahweh character is trying to get land off the other powerful ones, because he didn't get any land. He got a people group with no land. So when he turns up in the story, he has to take his people out of somebody else's land. Until you got that framework, you didn't understand what all the wars are about. But worse than that, most Bibles translate Elohim as God.
Singular.
Singular.
Right.
Most believers look at El Elyon, they think that's God. They read Yahweh, they think that's God. And the story that produces is a total distortion. Denying you've got a God who goes to war with himself. Thousands of humans get killed, get slaughtered when he gets into conflict with himself. He changes his mind, and so there's a genocide in the process. And so we end up with this monstrous image of a God. And it affects how we think about ourselves. We become these servile little creatures tiptoeing around, desperately afraid we might offend the Almighty, make a mistake, fall out of His will, and it is so disempowering. You go back to the original meaning of those texts. The Bible is an empowering document. It's talking about people power. It's talking about the power of the human being. And you read those stories realizing our ancestors went to great lengths to get this information to us so we could know what our true power is. And then along the way, editors, redactors, let's change how that's told. They turn it into a story that suppresses us and makes us manageable.
There's a remix going on. In music, they call it a remix, right? And so what's really sad about it is it gives us, like you said, this different perspective of what a true all-knowing, all-loving God really is, which I personally believe exists. However, I keep trying to tell people that the one that you're reading about in this book, or the ones I say plural, those are people that masqueraded as God. They allow the people to praise them.
Well, yes. I mean, that's half the story. And the other half of the story is that in the 6th century BCE, these editors sat down and they got now a word that's understood to mean God, the source of the cosmos, and they layer it over the top of other stories. So they go back to stories that are really stories of dragons, of oppression of human beings, like draconian entities, and they put the holy name of God over that text. So even if those awful draconian creatures weren't masquerading as God, the translators of it.
Gotcha. Absolutely.
That's where that ends. I mean, I tell you where that ends up. It ends up with human beings justifying invading each other's countries, enslaving other people groups, all kinds of misogyny and abuse in the name of God.
Yes.
Because that's what God does in the Bible. They don't realize, no, that's not the behavior of God. That is a violent colonization that just claimed as something holy.
So real.
You know, when people challenge me and they say, this is not Orthodox Christianity, well, let's just slow down and tell me what you mean by Orthodox Christianity. Because let's go back to the beginning of Christianity. Let's talk about Origen, the founder, the father of hermeneutics, the principles of Bible interpretation. Everyone acknowledges Origen as that. Clement of Alexandria, Irenaeus, he's the guy who came up with the term Old Testament and New Testament. Justin Martyr. You go to those people, they would say what I'm saying about how to read the Old Testament stories. But unfortunately, some votes went the wrong way. Everybody forgets what they said. They were foundational people, and this other mainstream took over. And what people call Orthodox Christianity is the mainstream after those votes. You go back to the beginning, and the first Christians, they knew about contact experiences. It's there in the New Testament, 1 John 4. They knew about ancestral spirits. It's there in the Bible, in Hebrews 12. They knew about beings washing around in the text that were not God. They talked about the craftsman who came and terraformed a devastated planet. They knew that wasn't a human entity. They knew about the Elohim and the Yahweh stories not being God's stories. Origen said, if you read those as God's stories, you have to believe of God such things you wouldn't believe of the most savage and unjust of men. He had it absolutely clear.
Yes, he did.
If we had them in this room, we'd all be singing of the same Yoshi. It's all been forgotten, and Christianity is assumed to be today's Orthodoxy. In the beginning, it was not.
And to add more credence to what Mr. Paul Wallace is saying, if you just simply read the book of Deuteronomy, your eyes will be opened and realize that, wait, this can't be God telling people to kill women and kill children, and it's okay to rape women and all. It's just not the creator of the universe. The creator of the universe is not interested in raping a woman, right? And sending you to a war halfway across your region to people you don't know because one person doesn't worship me properly, so wipe out the entire town and bring the spoils back to me. Why does God need spoils?
Exactly. And look at what the spoils are. Gold, beef, lamb, virgin girls. And you read it closely. That's not for the priests. That is for this entity called Yahweh. What does he want with those? And it's the same with all the world's dragon narratives.
Interesting.
You're shocked to hear me associate those. But anyone who knows the dragon stories, where you're getting them from Wales, China, Russia, anywhere else, they all follow the same shape. There's a time when our ancestors were governed by non-human entities, reptilian entities, who wanted those things, and they enslaved the people, and they would leave the people alone as long as they got all the gold and beef and lamb and virgin girls that they wanted. And human beings lived that way for a while until they realized, wait a minute, if we act together and if we agree together not to serve this thing, what's it going to do? Can't kill all of us, might kill some of us. And they reach a point, and we've seen this in human history, and this happened in the Philippines, where the people couldn't be terrorized anymore. Terror had been used for too long. And people reached the point of saying, what they're going to do, they could only kill us. And when the people reach that, it pivots into a kind of courage. They come together and they say, no, we're not going to work for you any longer.
That's it.
That story is in the Bible. Read 1 Samuel 15. That's when the people come together and they say to Yahweh, no more beef, lamb, gold, virgin girls for you. We're going to be led by a human being henceforward. And it was like, if I could say the scales falling from my eyes, I reread that after doing the research on Elohim with Yahweh, and I realized this is a dragon story. And that name originally was associated with the dragon story. And there are actually phonetic clues in that name that it is a dragon narrative. Now, once you made that switch, you reread all the stories of the Bible and you recognize there are lessons about people power the dangers of covert government, issues of hidden hands and geopolitics. It's an incredibly broad education that's in the Bible. So to someone coming to me saying, look, the Bible's true, stop messing about with it, I would say, yeah, it's full of powerful information. And we should stop messing about with it. Let's go to the root meaning.
Right.
Let these stories emerge.
You know, when you look into the Nag Hammadi and you see information about the archons, right? And where they're saying that, for example, one of the archons resembled this reptilian type being, and then another archon kind of almost resembles a gray alien, from the description at least. It's pretty interesting that they supposedly in some way they are able to absorb human energy, negative emotions.
Oh, yes. I think that's the most important insight of the Archon stories, which the original Christians talked about. So the Gnostics, they weren't some add-on or some alternative fringe. They were the original Christians before Orthodoxy became the mainstream. And the thing about an Archon is exactly what you said, Billy. It is an energy-based being that feeds off the energy of biological life like us. And they can influence our thinking and our emotions so that we will go into heavier emotional states, whether that's fear, anxiety, rage, and then they feed off that. And so you would have archons that would manipulate people into going to war so they can feed off all the misery of that. That's in the canonical Bible as well. There's a moment where the prophet Micaiah remote views this sky council where all the Elikim are, and they spend most of their time on that council fomenting war. So that those who are energy-based can feed off that, and so the manipulation of fear is all part of that story. And there's an entity there that we could call an Archon that tricks one nation into going to war against another on false intelligence.
Wow. Sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So it can feed off all the negative energy. And these are great stories. I have to believe them, that there are entities like that. But you know, even if you take them figuratively, there's powerful information in that message. In a sense, algorithms behave in exactly the same way that archons do.
That's right.
Hey, Bim just got riled by that post. Let's send in 10 more. Let's get them really riled. Then they start engaging. And
same thing happens.
We can monetize this rage that goes now feeling. And I think if you understand how algorithms work, that's a real insight into how archons work. And I happen to believe we are surrounded in a soup of company, some of whom predate off us in that way. And the message, to take kind of messages, you've got to be very intentional about your emotional state. If you are beginning to be called into a funk, you want to recognize that and check that quickly. If you're beginning to live angry from morning to morning, recognize that, you want to check that. You control your emotional state. Don't be manipulated. I mean, if I lived in Fort Lauderdale, I wouldn't watch the TV. Because on a daily basis, I'm seeing adverts for sickness on a daily basis. All these adverts saying, you know, is your water killing you? You might not be sick now.
You can be sick in a minute. And then all the side effects roll underneath.
So I'd be in a perpetual state of anxiety. I didn't want to go out today. So you've got to be very intentional about your intake. And just recognize the signs when you're going into not a good emotional state and check it. Do something to get yourself in a better headspace. Because if you don't, you're going to spiral in one direction or another. It won't be benefiting you. It may be benefiting something else.
That's so true. When you started looking into the scripture, how did it then lead you to ancient texts and tablets?
It was the root meanings as the key words. It was going to words like Elohim, Elyon, El Shaddai, Yahweh. Those are all the words that get translated as God, but it means the powerful ones, the powerful one more powerful than the other powerful ones, and the powerful one, the destroyer. And then this name that is a really draconian name. And then from there, I looked at other words that hint at ancient technology. So you've got the Ruach, you've got the Kabod, and you've got the Urim and the Thummim. And what's interesting is that technology is being described by people who don't know what it is. but they describe it so faithfully.
Yes.
You and I can read those texts and say,
yeah,
that is a drone.
mm-hmm.
That is something like a Saturn V. That's the way they're using that. That's a wormhole.
Yeah.
We recognize the phenomena, or we read weapons. There's the Kedi Mapasal, or the Kedi Mashital, the book of Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm.
One, you translated of the root meanings, you get to the shattering thing, the disintegrating thing.
Mm.
Apparently 6 individuals with the disintegrating thing can ethnically cleanse an entire district.
Wow.
Our ancestors would have read that and thought, you can't eat that with a sword.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can't even do that with a gun.
Mm-hmm.
We can read that and picture the kind of technology that's being referenced there. That's Yahweh's technology, in case anyone.
That's right.
And he wanted those people ethnically cleansed purely because they remembered he was one of many.
That's right.
And he wanted all the carvings of the sky armies that Sefer HaShoayim destroyed. Anyone who wouldn't go and show public grief that those carvings existed, get rid of them.
Get rid of them.
People read that, they find it hard to imagine, but I would just say to them, there are countries mentioning their names in the world today that if you don't go into the public square and show open grief because your great leader is sick or has died, you run the risk of your whole family being executed.
Facts.
That's this world in the present.
Right now, 2023.
That's the kind of leader Yahweh was in the book of Ezekiel. So all these narratives are there that when you are a preacher and when you translate those as God texts, you have to tiptoe around them. You know they're crazy. And so what I found was, as a preacher, I've always put that into I've got to get back to that basket.
Yeah.
And I went back to these anomalies. I did the translation. And you only have to do the translation work for a couple of days before you realize you are in the cuneiform texts of ancient Sumeria, Babylonia, Arcadia, and Assyria.
Yep.
Those are the sources of all the biblical stories of the Elohim.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start reading those, a whole other world opens up. You can't go back and read the Bible in the old way.
No.
So it was a by degrees change for me.
Yeah.
I've known there were these problems for a long time. I suspected there were ETs in the Bible for a long time. But once I did the translation work, I thought, okay, this is actually a totally new direction in my work for the whole foreseeable future. Because it changes so much of how we live our lives, how we think about ourselves. It's not just different religious ideas.
Yeah.
It changes your life.
Completely changed.
And the translations I use are the most broadly accepted translations of the cuneiform text. That's not me making translations up.
Right.
That's a bit a narrative.
Right.
These are translations that were made in the 1870s.
Yes, right.
1890s. And the narratives of ETs were there from that time to this.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of now saying, let's stick through the implications of this.
You know what's interesting? Enoch is spoken of on higher court in the Bible, but his book is not in the Bible, right?
Well, it depends which Bible.
Yeah, well, the Ethiopian Bible, I think it's in that Bible, yes. Most Bibles omitted the book of Enoch. And I was trying to find out why was that. And the only thing I could find was, I know that in one section in the book of Enoch, he talks about these beings coming down to earth and teaching mankind how to make weapons and teaching them how to make jewelry and perfume and all this kind of stuff.
I think that's the reason.
Yeah. I think that's what it
And it's a scandal in a way that it isn't in the Bible. So kudos to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, because they have kept it in the Bible from the beginning until the present day. But I think that it should be, because the writer of Jude in the New Testament assumes all his readers have read the book. And when he quotes the biblical Enoch from the book of Genesis, he quotes the book of Enoch word for word. So anyone who takes the New Testament seriously should be reading the book of Enoch. And I'm pretty sure you're right. The reason it isn't in the mainstream canon is because it contains themes that didn't fit the mainstream.
Right.
So that includes an abduction narrative.
Right.
That includes an invasion narrative. It includes a detailed unpacking of Genesis 6, which is a hybridization narrative.
Yes.
And clearly there came a point in the development of Christianity where they thought, this is going to be inconvenient. What we really want here is a religion that's pyramid shaped, with the emperor and God at the top, and then the people at the bottom paying, praying, and obeying.
Yeah.
The idea that actually the universe is more complicated, and they all like the adding contact experiences, and they might be getting accurate information from somebody other than their bishop or the emperor. Can't be dealing with that. One news agency only. Can one source of information. We don't want contact as part of the faith, even though it's there in the Bible, 1 John 4.
Right.
And I think the themes of visitation, hybridization, and then what I find really exciting, more than those, is a story of humanity's great leap forward. It says that we went from being creatures that lived in animal subsistence on the planet's surface to civilization builders because of non-human entities who came from outer space and taught us how to do these things. And I love that the Book of Enoch unpacks that enough to say it wasn't just that they taught us about how to do plumbing or how to build a bit tool.
Right.
It was things like art, makeup, adornments, more interesting clothing. They taught us how to be a civilization, and we were grateful for their input, and we celebrated them for a long time. And in the conspiracy, I point out, you go to the prophet Jeremiah, he tells you openly, there was a time where you could go to every high hill and under every green tree, and you'd find an installation saying, thank you to Asherah.
Wow.
Who came from outer space, from the Pleiades, to teach our ancestors how to become a civilization. And that's primitive Judaism. A remembrance of that great leap forward and all those who came and helped us. And then you get Jeremiah, you have 2 Kings, the king comes along, he says, I want to obliterate every memory of that. I'm going to destroy the carvings. I'm going to knock down the temples. We're going to illegalize the ceremonies. We're going to disband the priesthoods. I'm going to turn this into a religion with one God, Yahweh, a violent one. Because then you can justify anything.
Exactly.
One God, one king, one temple in Jerusalem. All the ties of the whole nation can come to Jerusalem, thank you very much, to the high priestly family there. Forget all the other priesthoods. Forget all the other temples that the kings, the Jewish kings have set up. And I think a lot of people don't know that primitive Judaism was a celebration paying a contact. And then you get Jeremiah, 2 Kings, and the narrative is changed so that everyone will forget.
Exactly. Changed by force.
Still there.
Right, still there. And, one of the biggest things that's always missed with these sacrifices, they wanted to have some nice fresh meat and vegetables because those sacrifices is how they ate their food.
Yes, that's right. And in fact, there's another book that doesn't make it into Western Bible, Bell of the Dragon. And it's quite an important book because it clarifies that the food sacrifices were not for the priests. The food sacrifices, a portion went to the priests, and then a specified portion goes to the Elohim, including Yahweh, for them to eat.
Exactly.
And a specified number of the virgins to the Elohim, including Yahweh, for them to do whatever they want. And join the dots. That's not a transcendent God. That's not the source of the cosmos, needing all that stuff.
You see, like I always tell you, not the creator of the universe. We're talking about people. They're just people. They're with more advanced knowledge, but still people. Hominids of some type. Hominids.
Some hominids and some
reptilians. Yes, exactly. Which is interesting because I want to study the Ubaid culture out of that region. I have some of the remakes or the scale models of some of the artifacts of the Ubaid culture, those reptilians. There's so many of them they found. Some had staffs, some had loins, some were naked. So I'm thinking those probably were the working class, the naked ones. So some are, a woman is breastfeeding a baby, but they have the reptilian head, the scales, and they found some of these structural remnants of their ancient structure still there. So this was a real culture that existed and lived on this planet.
And, I love to hear the mainstream academic explanations of these things. Sometimes
Yeah, they're hilarious. No, they're really funny.
It's just the inconsistency.
Yeah.
You point to one carving, well, that shows what the people saw.
Yeah.
This office is completely made up.
Right. I know. That's just a fabrication. Yeah, they wanted to make an entire mockery of a potential civilization that will never probably. No, what they created with these statuettes was what they actually encountered. Exactly. And I believe those statuettes might have been created by the Ubaid culture themselves.
Yes, I think that's very possible.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, I think you're on the right track there.
Yeah.
And of course, the academics do the same with representations of ancient technology.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to Mesoamerica and you find all these carvings representing what looks like space helmet,
right?
What looks like what we would call a Bluetooth microphone earpiece. If you ask the guides in the museum, why did they carve that?
Yeah.
The answer is, well, those are symbols that imply advancement, higher intelligence. And so the kings, the priestly kings and queens wear these so they look like an advanced being. Oh, really? Is that what the advanced beings wore then?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean it literally. Hold on. Why does something like a Bluetooth represent advancement? Why is something like breathing apparatus represent advancement? Something like a helmet, space helmet, something like a space shuttle. Why did they pick those symbols to indicate advancement? You just go the extra step with your question, and you will have stumped.
Yeah. Oh, you can see the steam coming out of their ears.
Yeah, that's right.
What we're talking about, sir, ma'am, is a cargo cult.
Exactly.
We're talking about a more advanced society that engaged a less advanced society, and that less advanced society deified them, and now are trying to mimic them by any means necessary, just like they did in the atolls in the French Polynesia.
I love that you said by any means necessary.
Yeah.
Because the clue for me that it is a cargo cult we're looking at, if you look at the Jaguar dynasty, for instance, Maya people, and these depictions I was just mentioning, you'll have, say, Queen Shuk, for instance. She'll be wearing that Bluetooth, but it's not working because they don't know how to make it work. They put something together that looks like what the advanced beings wore, but it's not achieving remote communication.
Yeah.
And you know that because she's simultaneously doing a bloodletting to evoke an altered state of consciousness so that she can have a contact experience.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about your Bluetooth. I don't have to do a bloodletting.
No, we're not doing any bloodletting.
It's a little clue that they are copying technology they've seen, that they don't know how to replicate, and they know that the goal is remote communication.
Yeah.
And so I think, so that you're...
Yeah, I think we can kind of see this across the board, all around the world. Forget the United States, all around the world. You look into the Americas, for example, in the Mayan culture, you see that they inherit these super advanced civilizations. However, they're still pulling people's hearts out of their chest.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, it's funny. People often say to me, hold on, you're saying the Mayans had all this advanced information about advanced beings. How come they were so brutal?
Yeah.
Well, again, it goes back to there was a time when we were governed brutally. Just because these beings had better tech than us didn't make them better than us. It just meant they could govern over us.
Yeah.
And sometimes they did it with brutality, and we just copied what we saw.
That's it.
And this is how we may turn power over others. So you've got stories in the Bible of Elohim, because they can get a human being to sacrifice their child. Well, now they know they've got total control.
Yeah.
And I think human leaders have copied that technique from that time to this. And that's why you can go back to at times in my history.
Yeah.
That's what the human leaders did.
Right, exactly. That was it.
And terrorization.
Because
I don't want to go to, this is a very dark strand here, but there has always been an aspect of the higher ups terrorizing ordinary people and benefiting from their terror in various ways.
Listen, if you go back and look at the Sumerian version of Yahweh, which is Enlil, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? So the Epic of Gilgamesh is the true and full story of Noah's Ark. It's Zudra and Gilgamesh and his created friend that went along with him on this hero's journey, and he's looking for Zudra. But long story short, in there, Enlil begins to get angry because the human beings are making a little bit too much noise. This is Yahweh, by the way. Kill them off. Here's the first occurrence of chemtrails. He literally says, spray their fields, dry out the crops, starve them to death. So we're talking about a being who's being looked upon as a god, who, whenever he gets good and ready, decides, oh, just call these humans off. Just remove. There's just too much noise. Oh, they're always hungry. They're always clamoring about. He goes, just kill some more. So you see this brutal, what you're talking about, this brutal way of ruling over them, showing them that their life was completely worthless and meaningless to them, and they would just kill them off whenever they wanted to.
Exactly. So he's there saying there are too many of them, they're too noisy, cull them, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
And so he does that spray.
Mm-hmm.
There's a spray story in the Mayan traditions.
Oh, wow.
Where the progenitors, as they're called, who are reptilians, feathered serpents, they again say these human beings are just too much, they're too difficult to manage, they're actually too intelligent. We didn't need them this clever. And so they go back to the chief genetic engineer, which is Kukuvat's, Salkotl Kukulkan. Can you dumb them down? And he comes up with a vapor. And when sprayed over human populations, brain damages them.
Wow.
So that they're limited to their immediate surroundings, their five physical senses. And beyond that, they'll have to rely on an authority to tell them what's going on. We can work with that, they said. So, I mean, goodness me, the brutality of brain damaging a whole population so you can manage them is a very, very similar ethic. And you talk about Enlil being the Yahweh character. He is sometimes in some of the Yahweh narratives, and it's often in the nastier narrative. So it's there in the flood narrative as well. As Enlil, he says, we'll kill them all with a flood. And then Enki, he is closer to the human beings because he's in charge of Project Earth, and he wants to rescue Project Humanity. And so he comes up with the rescue plan of the Pishtim, as you said, Trahasis. And that's how the story goes. So you've got the younger brother Enlil, he's awful, and then Enki does a rescue job. But what happens in the Bible is worse, because Yahweh is Enlil and Enki.
Right, they combine some of the two attributes together.
So he's actually double-minded. So he makes the humans and then changes his mind. He's sorry for what he did. And you created this insane monster. And then, if you want to stay in the mainstream of Christianity, you have to justify it.
You have to justify it.
Say, well, that's fine.
Don't question God. Don't question God. Don't question God.
And so there we are. You really have to suppress your entire conscience to take that as a God story. I did a video recently on the Paul Wallace channel with the title of Did Jesus Worship Yahweh? Got a lot of attention. I pointed out in that video that if you want to read those stories as God stories, the only way you can do it is to start justifying awful things. Start justifying genocide. And I had a whole heap of people coming on and saying, there's nothing wrong with genocide if God done it.
I had the same thing.
Prove my point.
I did a video called Could the God of the Bible Be Satan?
So it's the same message.
Same message. I think it's at 1 million, 2 million views or something. But same thing. A lot of the comments were like people going, no, this is what God, this is how it was back in the day and it was okay. And I'm like, no, it's not okay.
No, it's not okay.
Not okay.
And this is why, you see, Christians are entrained to believe there's continuity between the stories of the Elohim, stories of Yahweh, and what Jesus is all about. And it's not continuity.
No.
Jesus came to set people free. And he sets people free from Yahwism, which is why when you get to Acts 15, the apostles are all saying Christianity is not built on Yahwism. To get faith in those laws or belief in those stories, Christianity is going to be built on something else. It's the only way they could come to that decision was because Jesus put clear blue water between his idea of God, the source of the cosmos, and these awful, violent stories of beings who came and stole and killed and destroyed. These awful stories of the father of lies, and the one who was the murderer from the beginning. He's not talking about the source of the cosmos. When he called Theos father, daddy, he's talking about the Elohim and Yahweh stories.
Right.
Don't like.
Exactly.
I think there's a wonderful definition of God that I find in the New Testament of the Apostle Paul, because he's talking to a non-religious audience one time, and he says, by God I mean, or by Theos I mean, the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being, of which we are all offspring, as one of your own poets has said. And what I love about that definition, there's no anxiety.
No.
There's no separation anxiety. It's not you are separated from God until you had to claw your way back in. No, you are an emanation of God. You're an expression of God. Your thoughts are an expression of divine intelligence. Your consciousness, an emanation source conscious. You couldn't be closer to God than you are. It's something to learn, to enjoy, and actualize. And I find that's such an empowering vision, and we have detracted from it by so much of our religious tradition to get back to the root meanings, and it all becomes crystal clear.